Never before could one person sort of scale so much. I like fast-paced working and coming up with ideas. Part of that, at least, is my ADD.
Welcome to How Did You Get Into, the podcast where we dive into stories behind unexpected career paths and the journeys that shape who we are. Hi, I'm Clara and founder of Fired Up. Each week, I sit down with inspiring people from all kinds of professional backgrounds to ask how they got into what they're doing now. And today I'm joined by Max from TLGG to talk about how he got into leadership and what he looks for when hiring people. Max Orgeldinger has been instrumental in building TLGG Consulting over the past 5 years and now tackles the big digital questions as managing director. So yeah, we've heard in the intro what you do, but how would you describe what you do to my 6-year-old daughter?
I think in the end, I help other people do their work better. I'm not sure where 6-year-olds stand on companies, but like large groups of people, and I try to help them do their jobs more successfully.
Amazing. And what got you interested in the field that you're working in right now?
So I think it started with the fact that I was always interested in technology and in change, and I didn't really have a specific idea of how a career in that might look like. But then when I did my bachelor thesis, I did it on peer pressure and social networks from a psychological point of view and its implications on marketing. And that was kind of interesting because Facebook was just really starting up in the US and was sort of an interesting phenomenon. And when I then looked for jobs, I considered a bunch of different options, but really didn't like the vibe of them. And when I looked deeper into them and thought back of that bachelor thesis topic that I really enjoyed, and I read somewhere that they were social media agencies, and it was just a new phenomenon, and it seemed like a cool idea to work in something where there aren't any rules yet, nobody really has figured it out. Just jump into that, and I figured I'd do that for a year or two. Meet a CTO somewhere in Berlin and then launch my own startups, as all business majors I think in Berlin do. But I stuck around.
And you said that kind of like the vibe got you. Is this something that you are always looking for when looking, like working with people or deciding to work with partners, like the vibe that people and things have?
I think so, yeah, very much. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but we spend so much time at work, right? Both with the people, but also with the working styles and the environment. And I think it makes a tremendous difference how a company is organized, but also, what the culture is like, how people interact, what the working style is. And yeah, when I looked into a couple of options, it very much seemed like you'd be a cog in a well-oiled machine. And, I think that can be very satisfying in a way because, you're part of a large, successful team. I think I'm much better in like starting from scratch with a white piece of paper and figuring it out. I like the chaos sort of. And a social media agency with like 15 people, I think when I applied, that was a very chaotic environment. I think I thrived in that.
Was there a moment in your career that you wouldn't believe where are you now? Like where being like in a leadership role felt almost like impossible?
I'm not sure about that. I think I was always a very optimistic person. So I was always open for what could be. But there were definitely a lot of challenging moments. And I think I would have never imagined that I would stay at the same company for 13 years, especially not the first one, especially, not TLGG with the way it was set up when I joined. So no, I would have never imagined that 13 years later, this would be 10 times the size it was when it joined, and I would lead this and still be with that company. So that was definitely a big surprise.
Is there something challenging about like sticking to one company for you and your working style?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits and a lot of challenges. I think for me personally, I've never worked anywhere else. So while I've consulted a lot of different companies, this is my entire frame of reference. So sometimes it's tough to say how things could be because I've only ever seen this company grow, and every company has their own story, their own cultures with their own disadvantages and advantages, and I'm very primed obviously by the story of that company. So I think that is a big thing. I think personally, it's also a question I really enjoy where I'm at. But of course, and when I joined TLG, it was a big risk. It was a big jump. It seemed like a very unconventional thing to do. Obviously, when you stay that long with a company, you always have to ask yourself, am I becoming too comfortable? Like, am I still venturing out into the unknown? Or is this just the easy option?
So are you actively looking for change within like the structure that you're in?
Yeah, I think we've never stopped changing in a way. That's in the end what has kept me there. You know, one thing is what is the name on the door. I think the other is how is the company actually set up and what does it feel like. And growing up in the company, I very much experienced a company that was constantly changing. And now in the leadership role, we try to keep that spirit. So I think anything that we decide, any setup is only temporary and is the way it is until we figure out something better.
What is challenging about being in a leadership position for you?
Lots of things. I mean, I think just in general, having the responsibility, on all different levels is very challenging. I think the biggest challenge for me is there's always so many different forces pulling at you, right? And I think that the main task in a leadership role is sort of navigating and harmonizing those different forces. And I mean, on a very abstract level, there's obviously, like shareholders or the market or whatever you want to call it. There's clients, but then there's employees, and within employees, there's employees in different parts of the companies, different levels, and individuals, and everybody has their own opinion. And I think a big challenge is if you want to do the job right, you're trying to do right by all of the people, but then you can't also. If you try to make it right for every individual, that will break you, and you will never be able to take any decisions. And like finding the right balance where you don't become numb to the perspectives of others, but also don't get stuck in all of those different perspectives. That's, I think, the biggest challenge for me.
Wow, that is super insightful. So it sounds like you are able to hold kind of like many perspectives while maintaining your own.
I think it depends who you ask. Like I try, and then some weeks are better than others, I would say.
And are you kind of like soft with yourself in the moments where you fell on your own standards, or how what's your inner voice on mistakes? Let's say your own. Yeah.
It's a good question. I think I tend to be good at analyzing them and being critical about them in the rearview mirror. So I think I can. I have a lot of things to criticize about my path in the past that I try to learn from. I think it's always difficult in the moment, and I think that's another one of those balances in a leadership position that, especially today, I think people expect both. They want sort of vulnerability and being open for feedback and being critical about yourself, but they also want direction, and they want you to give them the feeling that sort of everything's going to be okay and we're on the right path. And I definitely don't always get that balance right. I think no one gets it right. And I think sometimes it's even I get stuck in like trying to balance those out, and then that definitely it's challenging. Yeah.
When you hire people, when you're in a hiring decision, like what kind of qualities are you looking for in people?
So first of all, I think I don't really give a lot about credentials and that kind of stuff. I mean, in the end, I think it's really about personality and aptitude for learning. The biggest thing probably that I try to look for is a motivation. Like, why are people here? Have they thought through how their career has progressed so far and what they liked, what they didn't like, what kind of working environment they need, and does that fit with who we are? So I try to be very honest about what we're not good at and for whom we're not the right fit, because eventually we'll both find out anyway. I think the other one is I try to look for people with a lot of agency. So people that see a problem and try to figure out the solution themselves, or focus on the solution more than on the problem. And in the end, I think that's a very abstract skill that makes a big difference in many situations.
And do you find that mostly in the CV or mostly in the conversation, or I don't know, on their own social media presence? Like where do you collect these cues? Because like hiring process is so fast and so like condensed. I find at least like you don't have that much time to like really engage and get to know a person. So where do you get those cues from?
So for me, it's really in the conversation. I mean, obviously you have to filter CVs and we have a multi-stage process and people in talent, as we call it, filter CVs and stuff. So in the past, when I sort of did the full process, I tried to be, let's see, more lenient on the CV. So I probably invited more people for a first discussion to, like if there was something that I found interesting, even if maybe there were some other signs that it might not be a fit. I was very interested in just getting to know people and seeing what's there. Again, this is also a balance, with a lot of people and a lot of applicants. You can't invite everyone, of course. You can't just have hiring conversations all day. You also
take a month off.
Yeah, exactly. But I still like. Sometimes in the CV or in the written letter, there's just one interesting perspective or fact, and for me that will push something up the pile more than just a perfect CV that ticks all of the boxes but is sort of boring.
Is there something that you would kind of like advise, or if people were asking you, a friend would ask you, like how could their CV or like their letter like stick out a little bit more? Like, is there something almost like unconventional that you would encourage people to do more?
I think spending more time with the individual company that you're applying to. So personally, the majority of CVs that I see is still very generic. Sure, the company is mentioned, but I think there's so much information about companies and also the individuals within those companies out there yet. And I see very little applications where somebody, just took 2 hours of research and, is actively referencing something. I mean, the same goes for any kind of cold outreach. Like I get hundreds of LinkedIn messages. It's also terribly generic. Like I think AI could do a better job actually of writing an individualized approach.
Yeah, so really like taking the time, more qualitative approach than like shooting out like 200 applications, but really like seeing how do you see yourself, what's the working culture, does the working culture fit to me, which is maybe even like more, like that's what I heard, like more important than, like the role or what we traditionally focus on, like, oh, this is the skills that I need, but kind of like forgetting about the whole surrounding factors, right? Yeah. Like, is this a remote company? Is this like an in-office company and so on? Yeah.
Yeah, and referencing things that you found out about the company, maybe even asking questions, I don't know.
Yeah. So if we could change like how our CVs are done culturally or how we do them, like, and we could add an experience in our life that really changed who we are, or was meaningful or explains for who we are, what experience from your own life would you add to your CV?
I think for me, probably I spent a year in Texas during school, and I think that both gave me the most exposure to a very different environment and also forced me to sort of stand on my own feet and figure it out. So up until that point, I think I wouldn't say my life was linear, but still, you grow up in the same area and you go to school and everything is sort of familiar. I mean, school is still a challenge, but I think going to an environment where everything is completely different, you don't really understand the context, and then having to start sort of from scratch. Like the first day I entered my school there, everybody else had been together at that school for 11 years and grew up with each other, and they knew the environment, and I was just this new kid. And basically you have to make a lot of first impressions and understand relationships and figure out your role in that. And I think that's a really helpful meta skill where I now feel fairly confident that you can throw me into most situations and they might be uncomfortable, but I'll sort of, I won't drown. I'll swim to the top and figure it kind of out. And yeah.
How old were you then?
I think I was 15 and turned 16 there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in our CVs, we kind of like start later, but actually like the early years are so impactful for who we become, right? Or who we are. Yeah, interesting one. Yeah, how do you see your industry evolving in the next years, and what qualities do you think will become even more important going forward?
So I think both consultancies and agencies, the way their work looks like, it's very depending on both what the larger information landscape, I would call it, is, but also how companies work with each other. And I think we are now in a stage where a lot of new technologies once again sort of change how we communicate. And I think whenever there's a change in communication technology, like the printing press or radio or TV, the smartphone, I think society changes on a fairly deep level, politics, economics, and so on and so on. I think for agencies and consultancies, there's two ways that will change our work. One is the simpler, more immediate one, which, AI is obviously the big topic. We do a bunch of different tasks today, and the question is always how much of that can be automated. And I think that's an age-old process, and there will be some automation, and there will be some limits to that. And again, I think the big skill there is really being adaptable and always being open to changing your roles and sort of going with the flow. I think the other way our work will change is really society will change, companies will change, and there's so many possible future paths that it's very tough to say what even is a company in a couple of years, what even is communication. I think it's very likely that we're going towards a future or futures where basically content, information, whatever you want to call it, is abundant. It's just the value is approaching zero. We have millions of hours of videos and texts and all of that. And what does that do to the job of communicators? Honestly, I don't know. There's a bunch of different possible paths, more curation, taste-making, whatever you want to call it. But I think the only relevant skill is really being able to sort of live a little bit into the future, right? Like have one leg, maybe a couple of months ahead already experiencing those things yourself to draw maybe some inspiration. And then just being quick on your feet and trying out stuff and adapting.
If you could change one thing about our working world, maybe like stigmas that are around us that hold us back, what would it be?
Maybe an unconventional answer. I think the biggest thing that's holding back people in the last couple of years is sort of the conversation around purpose. Mm-hmm. I think people have gotten this very larger than life image of what a job is supposed to do. And I think it's very difficult for jobs to live up to that. I think there is a way of finding meaning in every job, but I think it's something that needs to be created largely by yourself. And if you're looking for the large, world-changing, world-improving meaning, I think there's also a way of sort of finding a bad twist about every job. Like you can be sarcastic about almost any job. There's bureaucracy, there's all that. And I think that can be sort of soul-crushing. I think too many people think there's always this more meaningful job behind the next door and will look for it their entire life. And I think focusing more on the small everyday interaction with other people and finding something that just sort of flows well and feels good enough, I think that takes off a lot of burden about working.
We actually met in Japan, I think, the first time, and there's this, I think, misunderstanding in Western cultures about the Ikigai tool, right? And we saw it in Japan that, there is not this big search for purpose or oh my God, one day all my stars will align to this one perfect job. But you see all these people, and obviously there's also shadows in that, but you see all these people doing their task with so much, dedication. And that really inspired me actually to see that. So I love hearing this maybe a little bit unconventional answer here on purpose. I'm with you with that. If somebody would ask you, is leadership the right thing, leadership in an agency the right thing for me, why would you tell them that it's not?
I think it really depends on what people want to spend their time on. And I think in an agency specifically, the alternative to leadership is really focusing on craft and spending all of your time with the final work output, which can be very satisfying. And I think, it's a similar situation, I think, with coders, for example. That's one path. I think increasingly, especially with the new tools, you can actually have a huge influence as an individual. I think never before could one person sort of scale so much. I think if you are an amazing graphic designer or very good with words, there's almost no limit to how many people you can reach, increasingly even how much money you can make, just being by yourself pretty much and focusing on that one skill. And to a certain degree, I think leadership always means spending less time with that and focusing more on the people side of things, on organizing, on giving structure, giving direction. I think that can be very satisfying and very, very meaningful, but there is a trade-off, and different personalities will enjoy the two paths more or less.
And why would you decide for leadership for yourself, and what keeps you going?
I think one of the most satisfying parts about being a leadership role is you don't only get positive feedback about work that you did yourself, but also about work that others did. So in a way, it's almost like cheating. Like you could be having a shitty day, but so take my case, we are roughly 230 people. Someone else in the organization could be doing something amazing, and it still makes my day. So I'm in a way, I'm less reliant on myself. I identify more with the organization and with providing a framework. And yeah, I think that's beautiful about leadership. Also seeing people develop. I've had this long standing, I don't know if it's not really a joke, but that like I would really love it if I ever leave TLGG, if I would be hired by someone that I was responsible for early on. It's almost like you're building this network, but also the safety net of like if you hire a bunch of very talented people and then you treat them well, it's almost like you're betting on, over a career, thousands of talented people, which is, I think that's also in a world where I think, people can reach a lot of different things. Having exposure sounds so technical, but like being connected to their lives for a moment in time is something that I think is both satisfying on a personal level, but is obviously also an interesting opportunity.
So what were moments when you saw with colleagues of yours, like this agency that you just spoke about?
So I think a lot of times in service providers, but also I think in startups, generally there is a large gap between the ambition, the strategy, and the current status quo, right? Like you're always trying to build up new skills. You're always in a tension. You learn on the job, but you also need to win new clients, new pitches before you have those skills. Because, speaking very frankly, nobody's going to finance you hiring a bunch of people that have those skills before you actually win those clients. And you need to find a balance. You can't just sell something that you can't do at all. But you also need to be ambitious. And I think very roughly there's two types of people. There's those that get fairly scared and get cold feet, and they see the new briefing, the new task, and say, well, but we've never done this before. There's other experts. We need to hire someone. We need to have this figured out before we can actually offer it. And then there's others that are like, that's interesting. I've never done this before, but it sounds like an interesting task. How might that work? And and then they find ways, and everybody has a different process. Some people try to sort of just straight think through it. I mean, I think with a bit of time you can find a solution. And others, they start reaching out to their network. They say, I must know someone that has done something like this before. Mm-hmm. And but like going from this gap, from this problem to what does the next step look like, rather than sort of throwing the hands up. I think an answer you'll often get from a non-agent or a person with low agency is, that's not my job description. Mm-hmm. Like, like you have hired me for something else, And I think that is very limiting in developing as a person. The most interesting ways to grow is doing things that are not part of your job description and understanding that as a sort of step ladder into things that become part of your job description in the future.
Is this how you got into your leadership role in the
Very
end?
much so. Like I always did things that we hadn't done as a company before, that weren't officially part of my role. And they were always scary. Like I often, I sat there and I thought, wow, should we be doing this? But then I think the challenge and the kick of doing something that is novel, that always overcame that. But maybe that's also a little bit of my personality. Like I need that thrill. I need those kicks. I perform much better in new environments than doing the same thing over and over every day.
You talked about vibe before.
Yeah.
What is unique about your working style?
So I think, again, that it comes kind of down to my personality. I think I'm not sure how to say it in English. I think I'm a very associate thinker. I sort of jump from one idea to the next. I think I'm fairly good at connecting different concepts. I like sort of fast-paced working and coming up with ideas in the room. And I think, part of that at least is my ADD. Like I'm very stimulus-oriented. I like it when there's deadlines. I like that when sort of ideas are firing. I'm not that good in an environment that is very structured, where people expect the same thing over and over again in exactly the same type of working environment, and that's a challenge because different people also on our team work differently. So I try to find structures in which I can do it my way and others can work in their style.
Thanks so much for sharing how you got into this role and where you are now.
Thanks for doing this and thanks for having me.
And that's it for today's episode of How Did You Get Into? I hope you enjoyed as much as I did Max's story and maybe even took away some insights for your own career journey. If you're also thinking about changing your career or starting your own business, we at Fired Up would love to support you with free coaching. Just book an intro call to learn more. Hearing stories like the one we heard today is exactly why we do what we do. Change is always an opportunity. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories every week. And if there's somebody you would love to hear from or a career you're curious about, drop us a message. We love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for tuning in, and we see you next time.